We like Woodstock because Woodstock is uncertain. He's flighty at times. He can be all over the place, and he can be very insecure. But when he's with Snoopy, he's grounded, and the two of them help each other. The jazz theme really represents our willingness to be, or try to be, innovative within a structure. Good music, even jazz, happens within a structure. You can have people, good players, improvise, but the improvisation takes place within a structure. They all know the chords that are going to be played. They know whether it's a major or a minor. They all know. So even what appears to be free form is happening within a structure. So it allows creativity, but it doesn't allow or doesn't encourage people just going off without being part of a whole. And so we like to think of that picture as if not where we are, where we want to be. So who are we now? Well, we're an eclectic group of people. Native-born Americans of I won't say every, but certainly a lot of different races and ethnic backgrounds. We have immigrants from other countries that may seem redundant, but it's not intended to. Sometimes we find a need to say that. We have every kind of adult, from retired people to young adults and everything in between. We have a smattering of teens and younger, preteens and young children. We even have actually Logan's not a newborn anymore. Can't be considered a newborn, but just one step above newborn. And pretty similar to Scott in some respects is a mix of denominational religious backgrounds, and some people with no religious backgrounds at all. We're not a traditional Nazarene church, just like I suspect you're not a traditional Baptist church. So, unlike 8 years ago, based on our Sunday morning attendance, we're a lot smaller. Instead of 220, we probably do good to run 100 on Sunday morning. But we do have a high percentage of people in the congregation involved in ministry. And we think that we're experiencing a form of a revival that's kind of manifested by the things that you see on the screen. There's an increasing amount of transparency. There's an increasing a longing for relationship that people are beginning to express in very real ways, obvious ways. And there's a willingness to be accountable. And one of my measures of accountability is, are you willing to be counseled? Are you willing to be corrected? And are you willing to be disciplined? And we see a movement in our congregation of people who are willing for that. And the reality is some of the people who visit our church, and we get a fair amount, not a lot of visitors, we get a fair amount of visitors. Some of them think we're a little bit too eclectic for their taste. When they come in and they look at our sanctuary and they look how it's organized and they look how we do our worship service and they go, it's not quite for us. And that's okay. So, do you have anything you want to?
The kinds of things that I was talking about earlier, about the things that would appeal to people, and essentially at the surface level, you have a big congregation, are you putting on a show on Sunday mornings that's really kind of happening and everything like that. It's fun for a while, but then it starts to kind of lose its real depth, because essentially if that's all it really becomes about, then and there's no substance behind it. It really isn't much of a celebration. And Byron and I were even just talking about this the other week. It's just that, it's not about putting on the show. It's about coming together on a Sunday morning and celebrate. And more, as we're orienting the things that we're doing as a congregation to essentially not only evoke change in our lives, but then to be able to bear testimony to that change to first our brethren for their encouragement, but then secondarily in the community. That's really what it's all about. And so anything that we're doing that smacks of a show anymore is starting little by little to kind of evaporate. And that's probably the only thing I'll say there.
So this is what we want to be. I mean, some people will call that a vision, a people who fear missing out on what God is doing more than anything else. And we frame that specifically that way. Some people say, well, that's kind of a negative statement, but when we think about it, and when we pray about it, when we really try to pursue what is going on in the lives of people, one of the things we discover is fear is a major factor. And perhaps we'll talk about that a little bit later. What we should do. So this is, the first one is our vision, the second one is our mission. We think it's very consistent with the Great Commission. We want to help people connect to God, with each other, and to our world. That's it. That's our mission. So if anybody wants, what's your mission statement? That's it. It's relatively new. It's morphed several times over the years, and we think this is probably the one that'll work for us because we think this is the one that says what and captures what we want to capture.
We are.
Right. So questions to ourselves. How do we become what we say we want to become? And how do we help people connect in ways that help them become increasingly committed, and in ways that help them take ownership of their own spiritual journey? For us, big questions. So here's our response. Confronting the reality of fear as a barrier. Fear of what? Fear of change? Fear of loss? Fear of what's different? Fear of not being able to do church according to my preferences? Fear of the pain that might come by actually listening and obeying God. Some of those, all of those, probably the list is a lot bigger. But we think that a number, if not most of the people in our congregation at some level wrestle and have wrestled with fear and are wrestling with fear now. And that's okay. I think fear is a natural emotion. The question is not, do we not experience fear? Is, do we have the courage to overcome our fear and follow God in spite of it? So, but we talk about fear a lot. We have talked about fear a lot. We don't hide from the fact that people are afraid often. An unrelenting call to discipleship. You know, just like you say, what is the realtor's mantra is what? Location, location, location. We believe the church's mantra is discipleship, discipleship, discipleship. And that's it. We believe that's what we're called to. And so increasingly we are intense and unrelenting about discipleship and what it is. Focusing on the spiritual disciplines, particularly prayer and fasting, as Scott has already mentioned. And we do have designated seasons of prayer and fasting, even now. Trying to create a learning culture for leadership. We're trying to move away from training and saying, we're all a part of a team. How do we learn together? You know, and so we have different venues of learning opportunities. We have courses, we have books, we have dialogue sessions. Even our board meetings are often learning opportunities where we do a minimal amount of administrative work and a lot of discussion about the church and where it's going and our role in it and how do we fit ourselves into the broader scheme of Christ's kingdom. We have dedicated seasons for extended concentration, prayer and fasting being one of them. We might talk about that momentarily. And then providing connection venues for people. Again, the whole concept, we want to help people connect. So we picked out a couple of things, and we're just about done with this portion. But we picked out a couple of things just to highlight. So something that, and I'm going to ask Scott to talk about this, relative to what we call the unrelenting call to discipleship. We have what's called a discipleship or disciple maturity map. And what we define that is, it's a systematic schematic, and we don't want to overdo it, we don't want to make it too complex. But it's a schematic of discipleship maturity whereby we can plan, execute, and assess ourselves and the church and how it is progressing toward being a people, a community of disciples, followers of Jesus Christ. And I won't read through all of that, but I am going to move to the next slide and ask God if he would talk a little bit about this particular matter.